Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Miller, and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very, very special guest today is Azar Nafisi, author of Reading Lolita in Tehran. Thank you so much for being here, Azar.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
In reading your memoir, Reading Lolita in Tehran, one of the things that struck me was the culture shock you experienced when you returned to Iran after studying abroad for a number of years. Take us to the airport that day. What was it like for you?
Well, Teresa, for God knows how long since I left Iran, I had always imagined home. I mean, Iran had become such a part of a dream for me. And so reality always, of course, disillusions you. But the airport itself made me feel as if I've come to the wrong country. Because airports... every time I left Iran, or every time we would go to the airport to have fun.
Yeah.
There were restaurants, there were coffee shops. Every Friday and Thursday afternoon there were dances, the thé dansants, they called it. People would go there dancing. So it was a place of joy and pleasure. And I come there, there is military all around. There are these big posters of these solemn bearded men and slogans, down with America, down with the rest of the world, and women all dressed in black, and they searched my and I was so joyous. I wanted to talk to people, but they wouldn't respond. And they searched my bags, not for weapons, but for alcohol and decadent books. And so I felt as if I have come to the wrong country.
Well, and as we read your book, we learn that their idea of decadent and our idea of decadent is very, very different, or most people's idea of decadent, because, lipstick is decadent.
Yes, lipstick. The point about it is that everything that is a sign of life becomes decadent. Iran is a very tactile and sensual culture. I mean, just by reading its poetry. Wine in Iranian poetry is sacred, is a symbol of communion with God, and the image of God as beloved is the image of the beloved woman, So it's a very sensual culture, and they take away from you the life of senses because they ask you to cover. So they take away from you the visual aspect of life. Everyone becomes the same color. Basically, it is a uniformity that every totalitarian system imposes on its citizens, and it has to justify it. In Soviet Union, it was in the name of the party. You remember, again, Western decadent culture, and Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Faulkner were banned, And in Iran, they confiscated religion and turned it into an instrument of power, and the religion also became a victim.
Give us a sense of the liberties you and your family enjoyed before this new regime took place.
Well, my parents lived at a very interesting time in Iran, because since the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, Iran had started a very vibrant, homegrown movement for modernization and pluralism. And we had the first constitutional revolution in Asia, which opened the doors to modernism. And women were very, very active. So by mid-century already, my mother, she was very vibrant, very active, and Iran was very various. My paternal grandmother never took her veil off, but we would go to her home, and her grandchildren would swim in bikinis, and we all were side by side, So what was lacking was because the society itself was so advanced in culturally and socially, was the political freedoms. And I remember I myself became a rebel because we wanted everything, you know, and we felt that we could not express ourselves politically the way we wanted to. We never thought that you will have a revolution where instead of gaining more rights, you will in fact lose your rights. My childhood joys was going to movies. Iranian dance is very erotic. I mean, weddings were just joyous festivities. Iranians are very outdoor people, and so that is how I remembered my Iran. You know, the smells and everything that had to do with touch, with sight. You know, with all of that was taken away. You know, and the assault is not just on your political rights. The assault is on you as a human being. I keep telling people, in Iran, we're not fighting politically, we're fighting existentially. It is a fight to keep your sense of integrity as a human being. That is what is at stake, and not just a repressive political regime.
And ironically, your father was arrested even before the Ayatollah assumed control. Explain that a little bit about that.
Well, my family is not very good in terms of political power. They're obsessed with it, and they constantly are thinking about it. But once they cannot become part of power. We've always had that trouble. Both my parents have been like that. But my father, who was a very dynamic, he became the youngest mayor of Tehran, and becoming mayor of Tehran is a very sort of significant job. And he became very, very popular. But his problem was that he immediately got into trouble with the prime minister at the time and the Minister of Interior, and also with the Shah. He was very brazen. You know, he kept thinking that he can not belong to any political groupings and survive, and they very much they were very angry with him, and his popularity was not in his favor, you know. So they trumped up some charges. His files became very famous because of all the trumped up charges they brought against him, and the number of people they arrested trying to get confessions that, you know, he had bribed them and all of that. So it took, and he refused to leave the jail until he defended himself in a public trial. They kept sending messages to him that if you say you are sorry, write a letter, you know, and repent, you will be out. And he refused it. So his trial also became very famous because he defended himself in the trial, and it's 112 pages that I used some of it in my book. And he dispersed it all with quotations from our poets, you know, because he used to say that these people who are ruling Iran are not, they don't represent Iran's legacy. It's the poets, and I want to quote the people who are genuinely representatives of my country, and he begins with Ferdowsi, our epic poet.
Well, you've inherited his passion for literature, and you have also a passion for teaching. That's clear in the book, and you get hired at the University of Tehran, but it reaches a point where you simply cannot stay there. Tell us why you had to resign.
Well, the University of Tehran, you know, I mentioned in my books that had I been asked to go and teach at Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard, I would not have felt so much honored as University of Tehran. That was the seat of also many upheavals, both before the revolution and right now as we speak. So it was a very exciting time for me when I went there. At that time, the government was trying just to sort of clamped down on other groups, and they were murdering a lot of people and arresting. And the university was one of their focal points, and they have still not been able to harness the universities. So two things happened which finally led to me leaving the university at the time. One was what they called the Cultural Revolution. They could not manage neither the faculty nor the students, so they shut down the universities. And we went on protests and all-night vigils, and there were a lot of attacks on the demonstrations. Some of our students got killed, and it was a very, very bad time. The second thing was that when they tried to force the veil at the beginning of the revolution, they couldn't. 100,000 women came out on March 8, 1979, shouting, freedom is neither Western nor Eastern, freedom is global. And they protested the attacks on women's rights. And they started, their vigilantes would throw acid into women's faces and attack them with knives and scissors, but they had to retract. They couldn't impose it. So then a year later, they decided to impose it in workplaces where women would not be allowed in, and then in the shops. So that is how they did it the next time. And I, like many other women, and I like to emphasize this, that it wasn't just me or a few. Many women, both at universities and other workplaces, refused to comply. And so I just stopped going to the university until they expelled me. You know, I knew that I would have to wear it later on because I couldn't become public. But I felt that my students should know that this is done under duress, that this is not something that I did.
Yes.
It was imposed on me. And I had to make a statement that would stay. I couldn't respect myself if I... so I refused to wear it, and they finally expelled me.
When you lost your job at the university, you came up with a great alternative, the book club, another outreach. What criteria did you use in selecting the women to be involved in the book club?
Yeah, of course, that one was at a later date, because after University of Tehran, I went at home and we would do book readings and stuff like that. And then I went back 8 years later, and then I resigned again. But the book group, I wanted this, well, it had to be female because I didn't want them to get into trouble just in case anyone found out. I chose those students whom I knew were most dedicated to literature. Because none of us were getting anything out of it apart from the joy of getting together. And it turned out to be a very various group, because from Mahshid, who always wore the veil, to Azin, who had been married, now I think it's 5 times, you know, and was, you know, completely a rebel. They all gathered for 2 years every Thursday just to read these books, and I wanted them to be. That was their criteria, that they had to be loyal, to come every Thursday, and to love literature and to read the books.
How significant was the literal unveiling that happened in your home? I mean, women came in peeling off scarves and robes, and suddenly there's splashes of color. That had to be a magical moment.
It was, especially one thing I remember was that first day. Because, you know, apart from 1 or 2 of them, I hadn't seen the others. Apart from the universities where we were all the same, and then all of a sudden seeing them, it was like seeing a new person. And you know, when you are forced to do something, your gestures, the way you talk, the movements of your body, they all are different. They're awkward, they're repressed, and so it was color, but it was also movement. It was the freedom. I remember one of my students, Mitra, wrote about when she first went outside Iran to Syria, in fact, and the way she felt the wind in her hair, you know, and she said she could never forgive this regime for taking away that joy of, you know, feeling the sun and the wind. So it is a very liberating experience, you know.
Why the focus on fiction, particularly Lolita?
Well, fiction to me, of course, all literature is a challenge to reality, but fiction's claim is that it is real, you know, that it is, and it develops human relationships on so many levels, on personal, on social, and you know, political, historical, and I think that especially the novel becomes a representative of a democratic imagination. You know, because in fiction, no matter how much the writer is prejudiced against certain characters, each character, even the villain, has to have a voice. Otherwise, you're not a good novelist. You need empathy. And you know, I always bring Jane Austen as an example, because look at all this variety of voices, you know, in her novels, and these voices change one another through a conversation, which is not always friendly. But you have to look at yourself through the eyes of the other, and you have to look at yourself critically and want to change. You know, so we didn't have a democratic space at that time in reality. But through novel, we created it.
You know, and in the background, Azar, though, the morality police are lurking. Were you at some risk having these meetings in your home?
Well, people were at risk when they had their ordinary lives at home. Because everything we had, and I don't mean just me, videos, the satellite dishes that were forbidden. Then the four of us in this room, there are two men, and you and I look like this. That in itself, so they would raid homes where if men and women would sit the way they are, they would be taken to the police station. So being normal became a crime. You went underground as if you were committing the most terroristic political...
Well, and that's the great paradox, because they would tolerate killing but arrest somebody for wearing pink socks. I mean, it made no sense at all. And I experienced the outrage third and fourth hand. How did you contain your outrage?
Well, that is one of the most difficult things. And by the way, right now they have closed down all the humanities departments in Iran, saying that is where the source of corruption comes from, and that is how the West has penetrated our universities. So right now there's a lot of demonstrations about that. That is why I was so angry. And I didn't realize how angry I was until I left, because you're involved. But I think it's very dangerous to give in to that anger. You should not let these people dominate your mind. You should not let them take all the space, because even when they're not there, you're thinking about them. So the reason that these book groups and our underground parties, we had underground concerts, underground exhibitions of art. The reason people resisted with that was because they would not allow the regime to dominate all aspects of their lives. And Iranian people have been successful in that. The way the girls look now, they won. The morality squads were the ones that retreated. And many men and women who at the beginning of the revolution would want people like me to comply, they are now, alongside of people like me, the ones who are being accused of being decadent and being agents of the West. The former prime minister, for heaven's sake, is now in opposition to this regime, And this is a great achievement for Iranian people, and nobody talks about it, or very few talk about it.
Well, you were telling me before we were on camera that women are even getting creative in the way they wear their veils.
Oh, yes. I think that is one of the thorns in the regime's eyes, that they couldn't do anything. First of all, it belies the claim that this is how Iranian women like to be. If all Iranian women wanted to look the way the regime says, why do you have to flog them and jail them? I mean, nobody flogs and jails women here for wanting to go to church. They do it of their own accord. And that belied their claim. But the fact is that these young girls, you can disband political groups or put them in jail. What are you going to do with millions of young people who come into the street, wear lipstick, hold hands, these young boys that are accused of wearing rap hairdo, and they are put into jail, they're flogged, they come out, they do it again, and the regime has had to retreat. They still do it, but they haven't been able to. You go on the internet and look at the way these beautiful young Iranian girls use their uniforms. It's far more provocative than anything we do here,
Well, it's heartening, isn't it?
It is heartening because you cannot completely quash the human spirit. Communism showed that. Fascism showed it. In former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, jazz and Beatles and rock, they were dangerous to the health of the regime. Havel talks about what jazz did in Czechoslovakia. And that is what sometimes people in the West don't understand, that it is not the weapons, it's the culture that is dangerous. And what breaks my heart, and I know that we don't have much time, but I wanted to tell you, Teresa, what breaks my heart right now is how in this country we are neglecting humanities and liberal arts. We're neglecting our libraries. We're closing down our museums. We're not giving funds for the Smithsonian. This is the wrong reason for this country. I mean, I feel that my students in Iran are going to jail for reading Saul Bellow or Hannah Arendt, and in here we're closing down Saul Bellow and Hannah Arendt. We're taking away from our schools art and music, and this crisis is a crisis of vision, and it's not going to be mended just by economics and politics.
Very well said. Very well said, and it's important to bring that up. Your latest book is Things I've Been Silent About. In what ways is it an emotional sequel to the first memoir?
Well, I wasn't going to write this book. I was going to write something that would have been more related to reading Lolita, but not in form. I want the books to stand on their own, which was The Republic of Imagination. But my mother died when I was writing the acknowledgments to reading Lolita, and my relationship with her was very intense and fraught. I couldn't help it. Your books choose you. It is wrong to think that you have control over them. And I felt that there's an unfinished conversation there. And then when my father died, a year later, in 2004, I felt that I need to know, and death is so absolute a silence. And I had to deal with the absences in my life. And the only way I could deal with it was to create a conversation through writing about them. There are three things that I lost that formed my whole life: my parents and my country. And in that absence, I wanted to retrieve them. And I think writing is a retrieval of loss. It's a way we stand up to life and say, no, we won't accept death,
And you retrieve your parents in a different way, because there's the section of the book, Family Fictions. Were there pivotal moments in the writing of this book when you suddenly saw your father, when you suddenly saw your mother in a whole new light?
Oh, definitely, and myself too. I always felt that we were all my mother's victims, that she was so dictatorial. In writing this film,
It'd be a great film.
In writing this book, I realized that how much I had missed the fact that she was so alone. and that her own childhood, what happened to her, her losses created her life, and that her harshness was sometimes a cry for help. And I missed all the things she did for me, wanting me to have what she didn't have, wanting me to be independent, to finish my education, to be my own woman, you know. And also my father, whom I thought was the greatest person in the world, how much guilty he was in lying to her and leaving her alone after the revolution when she had lost everything, you know. And I felt very complicit with my father. I felt that no, writing is very dangerous because the truth is not just about other people. It uncovers who you are as well.
Was that liberating for you? Was this sort of like taking off a veil, like taking off a robe and writing this book? Emotionally speaking.
Yes. And things would come up that you hadn't thought about. You know, or images. With me, I work a lot with images, and suddenly things would pop. You know, it is literally like ghosts. Mm-hmm. It is as if these ghosts are demanding justice. You know, and my mother especially wanting to set the record straight. You know, so I wanted the form of this book to be so that people will realize how the emotions at the beginning change. The way I talk about her at the beginning is different from the end, where there is much more empathy at the end, and grief. There was always grief in regards to her. And there were moments in my childhood with her when she would take me to the shops and and the smell of the spices and the chocolate and all of that, which I also have in relationship to her, you know.
That's a lovely image for us to close out this interview,
Thank
Azar.
you.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure talking to you. One never wants to end when talking
no,
to you.
no. These books are just extraordinary.
Oh, thank
extraordinary.
you. I appreciate it.
Congratulations on all your success, and thank all of you so much for joining us on Writing Out Loud.